Welcome back to Daisy Asks. I'm Amy G, a clinical psychologist with a strong interest in true crime, and I'm exploring the Delphi case from an evidence and research-based angle. Today, we're looking at the Delphi crime scene again, and specifically at something that has been debated at length, and that is, were the sticks used to conceal the girls, or was it staging? This is an ongoing debate and it popped up in the live last week, so I thought it was worth exploring more deeply. And when we go to the actual transcripts, there's some clues that even the state weren't entirely convinced about the purpose of the sticks themselves. Today, we're going to look at what was testified to in court, what concealment actually means in forensic work, and why the scene doesn't fit neatly into the concealment category. So, without further ado, let's jump in. The sticks were not concealment, and the transcript proves it. So, a common claim that I keep hearing is that the sticks were used to conceal the bodies, but no expert witness testified that the sticks functioned as concealment. And when we look at the scene characteristics, the coverage is minimal, and concealment was never established as a fact in the evidence. Crime scene investigator Brian Olahay suggested that the branches appeared to be concealing the girls, but clarified that this was an assumption, not a measured or proven function. He then acknowledged that the girls were not completely covered. An assumption is not demonstration of concealment. And importantly, Olahay is a crime scene investigator. He's not a behavioural, staging, or offender behaviour specialist. His role is processing scenes and evidence, not interpreting offender intent. So let's move to Cicero. Major Cicero is a LaPorte County Sheriff's Office major with over 20 years' experience and training in bloodstain analysis and crime scene reconstruction. Cicero did not state that the sticks concealed the bodies. Instead, he testified that visibility depended mainly on the angle created by the tree, not the branches or sticks. He never claimed anything about the sticks providing effective camouflage. He was asked directly about the coverage during cross-examination. He was asked, but maybe 3% of these bodies were covered by sticks, and he answered, if we're looking top down, then yes. He was then asked how much of the actual body was covered, and he replied, very small amount. He also agreed that there were plenty of leaves available if concealment was the goal. So Cicero confirms minimal coverage and acknowledges better concealment options were present but unused. And this is critical. With all his years of experience, Cicero didn't state that the sticks concealed the bodies. He confirmed only a very small amount of the body was covered. He acknowledged more effective concealment was possible, i.e. leaves and debris was available, and his concealment discussion focused on visibility depending on viewing angle relative to the tree, not the sticks. And I think Cicero's testimony has been misinterpreted widely and used to indicate that the offender used the sticks to try and hide the girls' bodies from the private drive on the other side of the creek, when in fact, he's suggesting that the placement of the bodies in the bowl-shaped area where there was one particular tree was actually the reason that the bodies were obscured from view. So my argument here isn't that the bodies weren't concealed in some way, but that the sticks were not part of that concealment. And if the sticks were not part of the concealment, then what were they for? Let's look a bit deeper at what concealment actually means versus staging. Concealment means the act of hiding or obscuring the body, often using materials like soil, vegetation, or branches to prevent discovery. In contrast, staging and posing involve arranging the body or objects for meaning or display, usually without substantial coverage. Pictorially, we can see on the left what we would expect to see when sticks and branches are used as concealment, layers and clumps. And on the right, I've roughly indicated the types of sticks and branches and formations that were used on the girls' bodies. So when concealment is the aim, what we tend to see is a victim under vegetation, not decorated with it. We see brushes layered, it's not a thin lattice. Body outline is obscured. The body is usually partially buried beneath branches and leaves. It's obscured by brush and difficult to spot from nearby, and we would expect that it would be covered with debris to delay detection, not just a framing with a few lone sticks and branches. Concealment is about reducing visibility, and that just doesn't seem present when we look at the sticks on the bodies. So, if concealment was the goal, we would have expected maybe the bodies would have been curled or tucked to reduce shape. We would expect layers of leaves and branches piled over, clothing draped to mask the bodies. We would expect a scene that is difficult to spot from most angles. But the Delphi crime scene shows bodies splayed, visible, sparse sticks, not coverage, clothing swapped and not used to hide. And this does not align with functional concealment, at least when it comes to the sticks. Now, we can't use the excuse that there was nothing else available to cover the bodies, because we have to remember that this was February. This is winter in Delphi, and there was leaf litter everywhere. There are loose branches all over the ground. Natural camouflage was abundant, and yet none of it was used. And that tells us the goal was not to hide the scene. There were 2 full sets of clothing available, so if there was an attempt to conceal the bodies, you would expect that these clothes would be draped to cover the victims to obscure visibility, but instead we have clothing movement and swapping, an act that suggests interaction and arrangement, not concealment, particularly when it comes to Libby's body. So let's look a little bit more at the option of staging. Staging is when an offender intentionally alters the scene to influence how the crime appears. For example, to mimic a different type of crime like a suicide or a robbery. It's not simply placing items, it usually has a narrative purpose. So some classic staging examples include a murder posed to look like a suicide, removing sexual indicators to appear like a robbery, forced entry created to fake a break-in, items placed to direct investigators towards the wrong motive or offender. And I'm sure we've all seen cases like this. Delphi does not clearly attempt to resemble a different type of crime. There's no evidence that indicates an effort to mislead investigators into thinking this was something benign or accidental. Now, I know this is where people may suggest that this was an attempt to look like a ritualistic killing. However, that's fairly rare. And even if that were so, it would depend on the killer understanding symbolism and ritual well enough to carry it out. What we see in this crime scene appears so consistent with ritualistic posturing and posing of the bodies that it seems unlikely that someone who did not have sadistic tendencies would be even able to create such a scene. So I guess I've already answered this, but what was the Delphi crime scene about? Well, I don't believe that Delphi is either concealment nor classic staging for deception. The scene reflects post-mortem interaction and arrangement, movement, placement, clothing changes, and deliberate object positioning. And this aligns more closely with scene manipulation and expressive arrangement rather than hiding or misdirection. Now, I learned something new when looking into crime scene behaviour and understanding it more from a forensic lens, and that was a better understanding of what signature behaviour entails. When post-mortem actions appear motivated by expression, symbolism, or psychological gratification rather than function, they may fall into what behavioural literature calls signature behaviour. And signature isn't about hiding or misleading, it's about expression. Now, we can't claim signature without observing repeat behaviour. If we look at what's observable, those sticks do not represent concealment. They don't represent what we would consider classic staging, but what they appear to represent is some type of expression, symbolism, or psychological gratification. And so this further aligns with our ideas about the type of offender who committed this heinous crime. And that is that the type of offender that committed this heinous crime is likely a sadistic sexual offender, because sadistic sexual offenders engage in post-mortem posing and expressive behaviours like we see at this crime scene. Sticks placed in unusual framing type positions without there being any motivation of concealment or deception. And so, once again, I posed a question to you. Does a 44-year-old man who has no history of criminal activity, no history of deviance, and no indicators of sadism suddenly become a sadist overnight and engage in this horrific crime? If we consider Richard Allen's confession to Dr. Wala, the details he provides do not line up with a sadistic motivation. If we're to believe his confession, then it would be more in line with an impulsive, reactive response to a fear of being caught. And if that were indeed the case, we would not expect there to be display and arrangement and expression at the crime scene. We would expect it to be a quick and chaotic crime scene, potentially concealment with the abundance of leaves and debris, but not branches and sticks laid in formations. Now, you don't have to believe in the Odinism angle. You don't have to believe in any particular ritual in order to see that this crime scene appears posed and arranged. And if the crime scene is posed and arranged, then that suggests a deliberate, expressive motivation. Thanks so much for watching. And if you want more research-driven analysis like this, please subscribe, share, and drop your thoughts respectfully below. The conversations that we engage in the comment sections and the lives are always so interesting. And I really invite you to join one of the upcoming live shows where we will discuss this and more in lots of detail.